Good evening. It's 8 o'clock in Yerushalayim. This is WebYeshiva.org, and it's time to begin our regular shiur. This series has to do with astrology and the opinions of the great rabbis through the generations regarding astrology. What we have seen up till this point are two opposite approaches. We've seen the approach of those rabbis who embrace astrology, and indeed there were astrologers among the great rabbis, and we've seen plenty of examples of that. That's probably, historically speaking, that's probably the majority view as far as rabbis from late antiquity and the Middle Ages, the time of the Rishonim, are concerned. Then we also saw the opposing view, that of the Rambam, and those who follow him, probably the minority view in the Middle Ages among the Rishonim, the opinion of the Rambam, according to whom astrology is bad, not the least of the problems is its connection with sorcery and avodah zarah, idolatry. It's even worse than that. If you could imagine anything worse from the Torah point of view than idolatry, it's astrology, because astrology was responsible for the destruction of the Second Temple. Had the Jews back in those days devoted more time and energy to military strategy and less time and energy wasted on the foolishness of astrology, the Rambam says they might have won the war against the Romans. Astrology is bad. So we've seen these two opposing points of view. It's easy to understand the passages in the Gemara, which we saw. It's easy to understand the Talmudic passages, which we studied, as favoring astrology. After all, that's what they seem to be talking about. The opposite view, that of Rambam, would require, if we want to embrace the view which opposes astrology, that's going to require, as the Acharonim, as the modern rabbis pointed out, that's going to require a lot of effort and work, is somehow reinterpreting, somehow finding other meaning in those passages which seem to embrace astrology. We're going to have to do some fancy intellectual footwork in order to reinterpret those Talmudic passages if we want to follow the approach of the Rambam. These are the two opposing approaches which we've seen up till this point. Now, last time we did Rashi. Let me see if I can get on the screen here. We looked at this last time. Fit to which and synchronize. Rashi's opinion we already looked at the end of the last session. Let's begin now with new stuff. Here's the new material. We're looking at the Meiri, whom we briefly introduced last week. One of the great Rishonim, important not only because he wrote this monumental commentary on the whole of the Talmud, which we're about to quote from, and this monumental commentary is so important because not only does he express his own opinions, which in and of themselves are important, but he summarizes the approach of all the other great medieval authorities. This is an encyclopedic commentary on the whole of the Talmud, which is very dear and much beloved in the yeshiva world. Well, let's see what he has to say about our issue. The text we're going to look at is fairly long. I hope we're going to be able to complete it today. If we don't complete it today, we'll finish it up next time. But it's a long text, and it's really very important, so critically important, in understanding this controversy between the rabbis who are embracing astrology and those who reject it in the strongest possible terms. To understand this machlokas, understanding this disagreement, the text we're about to look at is terribly important. So we're going to go through all of it, even though it's a fairly long text. Usually I shorten the texts we're looking at just to take the key parts of the text. Here the whole text is so important, we're going to look at the whole thing. Here goes. He begins by talking about Hameonen, the sorcerer, which the Torah prohibits. Sorcery is something the Torah doesn't like. And he says, Ikar Isuro, the main element, the principal element in the prohibition of sorcery, the primary prohibition in sorcery, what's wrong with sorcery, is deciding what you are going to do or what you're not going to do based on the laws of the stars, based on the celestial bodies. Making your decision about how you're going to conduct your life, how you are going to behave, what you're going to do or what you're not going to do on the basis of the movement of celestial bodies, the stars, that is the foundation of the prohibition of sorcery, and the Torah doesn't like it. Well, our author, the Meiri, begins right away with a broad shot, an attack against astrology. It's exactly, he says, what the Torah prohibits when the Torah is talking about astrology, talking about sorcery. Now, just remember that we have clarified in the past that when we use the word stars, we're not necessarily talking about what contemporary astrologer or what contemporary astronomers call stars, even what contemporary astronomers call planets are also stars in the system. Stars mean all the celestial bodies, including the moon, including the sun, including the planets, including all the constellations. The distinction, the modern distinction between planets, stars, moon, and so forth is irrelevant in this discussion. We're talking about all the celestial bodies. Okay, so he's given his opening attack against astrology. Makol makom, nevertheless, however, indicating he's going to change his mind a little bit. Yesh dvarim b'koach hakochav, there are things under the power of the stars, under the power of the celestial bodies, nigles pulaso, the action of the stars, the action of the celestial bodies is apparent, is visible, b'dvarim atachtonim, in events that take place down here on earth. The celestial bodies are moving up there, and their effect, their influence on events down here on earth is apparent in some cases. Some things that happen here on earth are clearly caused by celestial events, by the movements of the stars. It's quite clear that if you do certain activities at certain times, you are going to be harmed, you are going to be injured. The effect of the star is going to damage you and is going to hurt you. It's perfectly clear that certain activities which you might engage in down here on earth are going to be injurious, harmful, and dangerous for you if you do it at the wrong time, because the stars are going to influence you in a bad way. This, most people, etzel b'nei adam, this in most people's minds is considered to be a fact of nature. It's a simple fact of nature that the stars have certain influence on events that take place here on earth. If you put a fire under a pot of water, it's a fact of nature that the water is going to get hot. And if you do certain kinds of activities on certain days under the influence of certain stars, it's a fact of nature that the stars are going to injure you, are going to harm you, and therefore, of course, you're going to want to avoid those activities on those days. And we saw plenty of examples of this in the Talmud, the Gemara itself, and we rabbinic Jews, of course, who rely upon the opinions of the rabbis of the Gemara. We, of course, have emunas chachamim, faith in the wisdom of the rabbis of the Talmud. Our entire religion is built on the thinking of the rabbis of the Talmud, and we've seen that the rabbis of the Talmud say exactly this. For example, Mazhirin shelo lahakiz dam b'sheni chamishi v'lo b'shlishi. It says flat out in the Gemara. I don't have to tell you the sources because you have the sources printed exactly on the screen if you want to look up the context. It says in the Gemara, it says the Talmudic rabbis say flat out that if you are sick, you're ill, and the treatment, the medical therapy, the course of treatment for your disease is lahakiz, bloodletting. Back in those days, they thought that many diseases were caused by surplus blood in the body, and the cure was to go to a phlebotomist, a bloodletter, who would open up a vein in your arm, bleed out, let some blood bleed out, and if you could reduce the volume of blood in your body back in those days, they thought this was medical therapy. Of course, nowadays we have better insight into the way human physiology works. Nowadays, modern medical science understands that this doesn't work as a cure. This doesn't work as a medical therapy. But back in those days, they believed that this was medical therapy. Back in those days, they believed that letting blood was a cure according to the laws of nature, according to the rules of nature. You have too much blood, you cure the patient by letting out some blood. But the rabbis of the Talmud said, not on Mondays, not on Tuesdays, and not on Thursdays, not on those 3 days of the week. Don't go to the phlebotomist, don't go to the bloodletter for medical therapy on Mondays, Tuesdays, or Thursdays. Why not? What's wrong with those days? Amru Sham, the rabbis of the Talmud say flat out, Shlishi, my timer, what's the reason not to go for medical therapy on Tuesdays, medical therapy of bloodletting? Why not let blood on Tuesdays? Mishum dekoi ma'adim bezavi, because what we call the planet Mars, what they call the star Mars, because Mars is ascendant on Tuesdays. Tuesdays is the day of the week which is under the influence of Mars. Shishinami Hokamadim Bazave. Well, but Fridays, which is not mentioned in the list, Fridays, which were not mentioned in the list of days to avoid phlebotomy, days to avoid bloodletting, Fridays are also under the influence of Mars. Teretz, the Gemara explained, since the multitudes are doing it, since the multitudes are engaging in medical therapy on Fridays, letting blood on Fridays, Shoma Psoyim Hashem, there's a verse in the Torah which says God watches over fools and it's okay to do it. Now, this is the text of the Meiri. There's more text in the Meiri which we're going to look at in a moment. Let's understand what we have up till this point. Up to this point, Meiri says there is some part of astrology which is simply an exposition of the laws of nature. And from the Jewish point of view, from the rabbinic point of view, from the Torah point of view, there's nothing wrong with living your life in accord with the laws of nature. That's what God expects us to do. When God created the world to work according to the laws of nature. And if, according to the laws of nature, such and such is dangerous, then the Torah demands that we not do it. If such and such is poisonous and is going to hurt your health, as a law of nature, then Torah demands that you not eat that thing which is going to be poisonous and damage your health. One of the laws of nature is that the influence of Mars on Tuesdays is going to make it dangerous for letting blood. Therefore, the Torah doesn't want you to let blood on Tuesdays. Therefore, the Torah approach, the derech haTorah, the path of Torah, is to embrace at least this element of astrology, which is simply a law, a rule of nature, a law of nature. Yeah. Yeah, well, we're going to talk about reading the Torah or other mitzvahs protecting you. We're going to come to that in 2 or 3 moments. Now, what about Fridays? There's a law of nature that Fridays, letting blood on Fridays, is also dangerous. Why then is it okay to let blood on Fridays? Well, here we come to a very important halachic idea. The Meiri has formulated for us a halachic principle, a principle of Jewish law. Is formulated in the context of this one specific issue, but the law which he has formulated for us is of vast application in many, many everyday activities which are important for us to know about. Let's understand the rule which the Meiri has just formulated for us. Whenever we can say, Dashu Bei Rabin, literally the words mean, the multitudes tread there, the multitudes walk there, the place where everyone else is walking, you too are allowed to go, even though there is some danger there. For example, I live here in Yerushalayim. The main roads connecting Yerushalayim with Tel Aviv are dangerous places. The horrible truth is the accident rate, fatal accident rate on the roads in Israel is fairly high. That's the unfortunate truth. That's a simple fact. The number of fatalities in automobile accidents in the state of Israel, as in many other countries, is unconscionably high. Is it permitted for me to get into a car and drive to Tel Aviv? I am putting myself in the face of danger, and we're not talking here about something supernatural. We're not talking about something here above and beyond the laws of nature. It's a simple fact that driving from here to Tel Aviv is dangerous. People really die on the roads. There really are automobile traffic fatalities. It really happens. It's a simple fact. Well, Dashu Bei Rabin. Everyone's doing, well, not literally everyone, but the multitudes, huge number of people do it every day. And since the multitudes, huge number of people are doing it every day, I too am allowed to do it, even though there is some danger in it. The truth is, there's a lot of danger lurking everywhere in the world we inhabit. The truth is, it's impossible to protect yourself from all the dangers in this world as long as you do what everyone else is doing, not literally everyone. As long as you do what the multitudes are doing, then from the Torah point of view, you are okay. You're not guilty of unnecessarily endangering yourself. Yeah, well, of course, I live right next to Route 443 as well, so I'm quite familiar with that. Let's go one step further. According to this, Rav Moshe Feinstein and other rabbis point out, we're going to have to ask the question, what about all kinds of bad habits that people have out there, bad habits which actually might be life-threatening? No, I confess my sins. I also have bad habits. Among the bad habits I have, Baruch Hashem, fortunately, among the bad habits I do not have is addiction to nicotine. I do not smoke, and I'm very happy not to smoke. I am not addicted to nicotine. I have no tobacco addiction. But there are plenty of other people out there who do smoke cigarettes. Now, it's a simple fact, a fact of nature. It's a simple fact that smoking regularly does indeed endanger the health. This has been proven over and over again. Is it halachically permitted to smoke? Is it halachically permitted to endanger oneself in that way? Well, if it's a bad habit, didashu be'rabim, if it's a bad habit which the multitudes out there are doing it, if everyone, we don't need literally everyone, if a large number of people are doing it, you too are permitted to do it. There's no prohibition to engage in dangerous activities which everyone else is doing. Now, this is not the context. This is not the time for us to try to pin down, for us to try to define exactly how many people have to be doing it in order for it to be considered the multitudes are doing it. I don't know what the number of people might be who are engaging in bungee jumping off of bridges over dangerous chasms, but surely not a very large number. Exactly what that number has to be in order to make the activity permissible, that's a discussion for another time. How many people actually engage in skydiving? Well, I don't know the number, but pinning down the number of people who have to engage in skydiving for it to be a permitted activity, well, let's leave that discussion for another time when we can actually look at the sources. Bottom line, the stars, the bad influence of the stars. Some of the stars have good influences, but those stars like Ma'adim, like Mars, which have a bad influence on events down here on Earth and are injurious and harmful to us, of course, one must avoid activities under the influence of Mars, which are going to harm you, which are going to be injurious, which are going to be dangerous for you, unless, of course, it's something which everyone is doing. Now let's take this down to a very practical, everyday situation. It's very common, is it not, that one goes to the physician either for a routine checkup, a routine examination, or you go to the physician because you have some symptoms, you're sick and you want a diagnosis and a course of treatment, and very often part of what the physician wants to do is to draw some blood. Physician wants a sample of your blood to be analyzed in a laboratory, in a laboratory. A little bit of bloodletting is necessary for your course of treatment in order to figure out what your diagnosis is and course of treatment, or maybe just a routine periodic blood test in order to make sure that you don't have any problems with your internal organs and so forth and so on. Bloodletting, in a sense, is part of modern medical practice. We're talking only about small quantities of blood which are taken for laboratory tests, but quite often the modern physician also wants to let out a little bit of blood for medical purposes. Well, here in Israel, different countries have their medical services organized in different ways. The way it works here in Israel is if the physician wants your blood to be tested in a laboratory, the physician will write out an order for the nurse to take such and such amount of blood and send it to the laboratory for such and such purposes, for such and such a test to be done. You take that instruction from the physician to your neighborhood nurse, show it to the neighborhood nurse, and she, typically a woman, or some of them are men, the neighborhood nurse will read the instructions, take the proper amount of blood, and send it off to the proper laboratory for the proper test. Now, that leaves me free to choose which day of the week I'm going to go to the neighborhood nurse with that instruction from the physician for a blood test. Now, if it's a Tuesday, should I say to myself, hey, according to the Gemara, anyone who lets blood for medical purposes on Tuesdays is in danger because Ma'adim, Mars, is ascendant. Mars has its influence on that day. Let me wait until Wednesday to do the blood test. Is that something I should say? Or shall I say, well, it's just a blood test after all. It's only a few cc's, a few cubic centimeters of blood. Is it okay to go ahead and do it? Let me call up my rabbi and ask for Torah advice, whether or not it's wise to do a blood test on Tuesdays. So I call up the rabbi, or I'm the rabbi, and someone calls me up with exactly this question. The answer, according to the Meiri, is simple and straightforward. I say, it's quite clear, it's quite obvious, is it not, that the waiting room for the nurse who is taking everyone's blood in the neighborhood for routine blood examinations, it's quite clear, is it not, that the waiting room is chock full of people on Tuesdays, just like every other day of the week. Isn't that true? The rabbin, the multitudes, are going for blood tests on Tuesdays, just like every other day of the week, and therefore you are permitted to do it as well. Is there some danger? The truth is, there is always danger in every blood test. That's why you want a trained professional, a trained medical professional, to do the blood test. It has to be done in the correct way, a sterile way. You don't, chas v'sholom, want to get a needle stuck in you, which was previously stuck into someone else. Horrible diseases can be transmitted from one person to another in that way. Of course, you want a trained medical professional who's going to take the blood in a safe way. Is it possible that even the trained medical professional is going to make a mistake and harm you and injure you in the blood test? Of course it's possible. Even the best trained specialists make mistakes. And of course it's possible. Everyone in the medical field, whether it's a physician or a nurse or a dentist, anyone in the medical field who uses syringes regularly has had the experience of sticking the needle into himself, into herself at some point in time. Now that's a little bit scary. The needle, which was previously used for a patient, either to inject medicine into a patient or to take out blood from a patient, that same needle, now the medical professional, the dentist, the physician, the nurse, accidentally sticks into himself, accidentally sticks into herself. This is something which more or less every medical professional has experienced at some point in his professional life, in her professional life. Mistakes happen. Mistakes happen. Of course mistakes happen. Is there some danger in using those needles? Of course there's danger in using those needles. Is it permitted? Yes, it is permitted because the rabbin, the multitudes are doing it. This is the idea of the Meiri. Yeah, of course, the reason to do the blood test could be life-saving. That's true. But the vast majority of blood tests are not for the purpose of saving lives. The vast majority of blood tests are routine or for simple diseases, simple conditions. The vast majority are not involved in life-saving conditions. Okay, we understand the approach of the Meiri. The Meiri ends his formulation with an important phrase, quoting a verse in the Bible. Shomer Pesayim Hashem, the reason you are allowed to do what other people are doing, what the general public is doing, the reason you're allowed to engage in activities which the multitudes are also doing is because Shomer Pesayim Hashem, God watches over fools. You can depend. It is permitted for you to depend upon God's watching over you, even though you are doing a dangerous activity. You're in your car, driving on the highway. That is dangerous. People do die fairly frequently in this activity. You are permitted to drive your car, be a passenger in the car, driving on the highway, even though it's dangerous, because the multitudes are doing it, because you are permitted to rely upon God guarding you. That you're permitted to do. God watches over fools. Well, it's clear, is it not, that this applies to people who are fools. If you're not a fool, then you cannot depend upon God's watching over you. Who are the people that God watches over? People who don't know any better, people who are fools, people who don't know any better and nonetheless go ahead and do what everyone else is doing. It's those fools that God watches over. That means that if you are driving on the road between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, or perhaps you're just a passenger in the car, it is, of course, obligatory. It is, of course, required. The Torah, of course, demands that you take those safety precautions that you know how to take. You have to put in a seatbelt. If you are the driver, you must drive prudently and not recklessly. Of course, you must take care. Of course, you must be careful as well as you know how to be careful. You put on your seatbelt, you drive as prudently, as carefully as you know how to drive. The residue of danger, which is still there, even though you are a good, careful driver, even though you do nothing wrong in your driving, you drive carefully and correctly, still it's possible to die in a traffic accident. Some other fool can run into you, and it's possible to be in an accident as careful as you are. Once you are as careful as you know to be, once you take care as well as you know to take care, the remaining danger over which you have no control, the remaining danger, regarding the remaining danger, you are entitled to say, you are permitted to say, Shom Apsoim Hashem, I depend upon God. As far as I know how to protect myself, I have protected myself. I don't know what to do about the remainder of the danger which is on the highway. Even though I drive carefully and correctly, someone else might still run into me and cause a fatal accident. Regarding that residue of danger, it's okay to say Shom Apsoim Hashem, but you can't drive recklessly. And driving without the seatbelt is wrong. The Meiri demands that you take care, that you be careful as well as you know how to, and the rest is permitted as long as it's an activity which everyone else is doing. Okay, now what's the conclusion as far as astrology is concerned? Hine, behold, shemitzad ma'adim sholet al hadam, since Mars, the red planet, right, Mars, if you look carefully at Mars in the skies, it has a reddish color to it. Mars, the red planet, dominates events here on Earth which are connected with blood. His hero shelo lahakiz dam b'yom shu moshel b'shat zu b'menu. And therefore, the rabbis of the Gemara commanded us, instructed us, not to do any activity involving blood, like, well, in modern times, blood tests, or in those days, phlebotomy, not to do blood-related activities when Mars is ascendant. Who Inyan Bizave? That's what the word Bizave means, when Mars is ascendant. And when is that? B'yom Shlishi, Shash Minis. It's at 8 o'clock, the 8th hour of the day. Starting from sunrise, every hour of the day is counted. The 8th hour of the day after sunrise, that's the hour when Mars is ascendant. The 8th hour on Tuesdays, that's the time not to let blood. L'shishi, shashishis, on Fridays, it's the 6th hour after sunrise, which is dangerous for blood-related activities. One should not let blood in the 6th hour after sunrise on Fridays. See, not only does our author accept and embrace astrological guidance in conducting our lives, he's willing to specify the precise details, at least in some cases. His commentary on the Gemara is not a full manual on astrology, but quite a number of details from the full manual on astrology are embraced and quoted in his commentary on the Talmud. The 8th hour on Tuesdays, the 6th hour on Fridays. These are the times when Mars is ascendant. These are the times when you should not engage in anything involving blood. What about a shochet? Well, we are going to come to the question of whether engaging in a mitzvah, whether the mitzvah itself can protect you, and we'll find out. We'll find out that if it's brit milah, ritual circumcision, or shchita, ritual slaughter of the animal, these are mitzvahs, and the mitzvah will, of course, protect you. Well, we'll come to sources on that. Now our author, the Meiri, began with his attack. Astrology is sorcery and therefore prohibited by the Torah. On the other hand, he says, some of astrology is just revealing to us facts of nature, rather like medical science reveals to us facts of nature. And of course, God, who created the world to work according to the laws of nature, expects us to follow those laws and expects us to make our decisions in accord with the laws of nature. Astrology is prohibited, but there are elements in astrology which are true, valid, correct, and we are expected to follow them. Mekan, therefore, and these are still the words of the Meiri, therefore, samhu ketzat hachmei tchuna, therefore some scientists, tchuna technically means geometry, but back in those days, the people who studied geometry were the natural scientists. It's not only geometry he's talking about. Therefore, some scientists, mina chasidim shabehem, the pious ones, some of the Torah-observant pious scientists back in those days, lahakel, saw fit to be lenient, b'shar devarim, in other matters as well, lomar, to tell us, she'afa rotzeh livnot bayit, o limtoa kerem, o lachpor be'er shel mayim, v'chol ma'aseh she'shabtai sholet alav, yivater miyom sheni u'shlishi v'shishi she'shabtai bazui behem. Therefore, some of the rabbis took their cue from the rabbis of the Gemara. Some of the rabbis took their cue, took their idea from the rabbis of the Gemara who taught us that when Mars is ascendant, you don't engage here on earth on blood-related activities. And some rabbis extended this idea to other celestial bodies. For example, Shabtai, the planet Saturn. Now, just as Mars influences blood-related events down here on Earth, Saturn controls certain other events here on Earth, namely house building, planting a vineyard, digging a well. Those are the three activities which fall under the influence of Shabtai, which fall under the influence of Saturn. And therefore, during those moments when Saturn is bazui, during those moments when Saturn is hidden from us, you don't want to engage in the activities which need Saturn's influence for success. In order to dig a well successfully, in order to plant a vineyard successfully, in order to build a house successfully, you're going to want the beneficent influence of Saturn. And that beneficent influence is hidden from us. We do not have the beneficent, the good influence of Saturn on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Fridays. Those are the days when we don't have the good influence of Saturn. Those are the days when you should not plant a vineyard, should not dig a well for water, and should not work in house construction. Yachil, instead, you should begin any of these activities. These are all activities which take a few days. You can't plant a vineyard of any size in one day. You can't hope to dig a well of any size in one day. You don't build a house in one day. But you begin these activities, Rishon, Revi'i, Chamishi, on Sundays, Wednesdays, or Thursdays. If you begin these activities under the influence of Saturn, then you have much higher likelihood of success. And similarly, similarly, we have to look at the natural influence of each of the stars, each of the celestial bodies, and this is what certain rabbis studied over the generations. They studied the influence down here on earth of each specific celestial body until they finally came to the conclusions that Chatan, someone who wants to get married, a Chatan, Shahayu Machnisim Oto Lechupa B'Yom Shishi, that if the Chatan wanted to get married on a Friday, Tziva, the rabbis who understood the influence of the stars upon earth, those astrological rabbis commanded the Chatan who wants to get married, L'Hakdimo, not to get married on Friday, do it a day earlier, on Thursday. Get married not on Friday, but on Thursday, specifically in the third hour of the day. Get married on Thursdays in the third hour of the day. That's the time which is under the influence of the Levana, the white star. We don't call it a star at all. We call it the moon. But what we call the moon, they call it the white star. The moon is ascendant, and the third hour of Thursdays, wow, that's the time to get married. When the moon is ascendant, that's the time to begin any activity. If you want a good result, that's the time to get married. That's the time which will make an auspicious marriage. That's a time when you'll have Mazal Tov, a good constellation, a good arrangement of the stars for your marriage. And you'll notice that according to the Miri anyway, the influence of the stars has to do not with the whole duration of your activity. Rather, the influence of the stars has to do with the moment you begin a certain activity, when you begin your marriage, when you begin building the house, when you begin planting the vineyard, when you begin digging the well for water. That's the time to look at which star, which celestial body is ascendant, and decide whether or not you should or should not begin the activity. That's what the Miri says. Hechlitu ma'maram lomar shekola omer shah plonit yofel hazeh. Anyone, therefore, bottom line, the conclusion of these astrological rabbis is that anyone who says such and such a time is good for this activity, such and such a time is bad for that activity, anyone who wants to use astrological signs in order to decide what time of the week, which time slot in the week is good for this, bad for that, this is no different than someone who says, no different than someone who says, this plant is good for your eyes. You have an eye infection, put this plant on your eye. This plant has medicine in it, which is good for your eye. So someone says, oh, you're constipated, or you have diarrhea, this medicine will help for constipation. This medicine, a different medicine, will help for diarrhea. Well, just like the physician who prescribes different plants, in those days, it was plants, it's extracts from plants, or most of it's just made synthetically. Just like the doctor who prescribes different medicines for different medical conditions, just following the laws of nature, following the facts of nature, that's exactly the same as the astrologer who says, You want to do this activity, you want to do that activity, start it at the right time of the week, and all will be well. אמרו שכל שאינו שואל לעשות על פיהם, אלא שנודע לו שכן מעצמו, או שאמרו לו הקלדיים מעליהם, וחששו לדבריהם. Therefore, anyone who heard from the astrologers what to do or what not to do, or anyone who figured out himself from the astrological manuals what to do or what not to do, that's fine. Ein kan chiyuv. There's no guilt associated with that. Rabbi Akiva amar lo l'kaldiim. After all, we saw that Rabbi Akiva himself, one of the greatest, anyone's short list of greatest Talmudic rabbis, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva himself said regarding the stargazers, regarding the astrologers, Hahu yom da'ayel lebe ganta trik lechavia. Rabbi Akiva himself in the Gemara was concerned about what the astrologers told him. The astrologers told Rabbi Akiva, the day your daughter gets married is the day she's going to die. That's what the astrologers told Rabbi Akiva. The day your daughter gets married is the day she's going to die. And Rabbi Akiva was quite concerned about that. Rabbi Akiva believed the words of the astrologers. Okay, the Meiri is bringing a powerful proof to those who embrace astrology. The powerful proof is from Rabbi Akiva himself, who apparently believed in what the astrologers told him. Before we can understand exactly what's going on here, let's look at the Talmudic story of Rabbi Akiva and the astrologers. The Meiri, our author, just refers to it and assumes that you're familiar with the Talmudic story. So let me put the Talmudic story on the screen, and let's see the story. This is the full story, which the Meiri is referring to. I've just quoted from the Gemara. On the top half of the screen, we have the original text of the Gemara. On the bottom half of the screen, I've just translated exactly this text, word for word, from the Aramaic language of the Gemara into Hebrew, because nowadays most people find it easier. Let me just read to you the story, and then we'll understand what Meiri is trying to teach us. Here's the story, word for word. From the words of Rabbi Akiva, we understand that the constellations have no influence over Jews. How do we know that? Rabbi Akiva had a daughter. The astrologers said to Rabbi Akiva, on the day that she gets married, a snake is going to bite her, and she is going to die. Rabbi Akiva was quite worried about this and quite upset. On that day, the day that she's getting married, on that day, she took a hairpin out of her hair and stuck the pin into the wall. She's going to sleep. She's getting ready to go to sleep. She's preparing herself for bed. She takes the hairpin out of her hair and sticks it for safekeeping into the wall. In the morning, she's going to retrieve her hairpin and stick it back in her hair, I suppose. Well, it happens that she stuck the pin into the wall, and hiding in the wall was a snake, and the pin killed the snake. In the morning, when she pulled the pin out of the wall, the dead snake came together with it. A little bit disgusting, but at least she saved her life. She didn't die from this snake that was in waiting and was predicted by the astrologers to kill her. Her life was saved by that hairpin that she stuck into the wall. Her father asked her, Ma'asit, what did you do different last night? Well, to tell me about your movements last night. I want to understand what happened with this snake in this hairpin. Tell me everything that happened last night. I want to understand. The Erev Ba'ani, she answered, that night a poor person came. Karabadelet. Last night, before getting ready for bed, a poor person knocked on the door, begging. A beggar begged, knocked on the door begging. Hula mayu through the Masuda. Everyone in the household was busy preparing for the wedding feast, right? Because this was the night before the wedding. Everyone in the household was busy preparing for the wedding feast. And no one even heard this beggar knocking at the door because everyone was so busy preparing for the wedding feast. I took my dinner, the daughter said. I heard him knocking at the door, and I gave him my dinner because he was begging for food. Amala, Rabbi Akiva said to his daughter, Asit mitzvah. That was a great mitzvah which you performed. A great mitzvah of chesed, a great mitzvah of kindness, a great mitzvah of tzedakah, a great mitzvah of philanthropy. Thereupon, Rabbi Akiva went out among the public and proclaimed tzedakah tachil mamavet, performing a mitzvah, in this case, the mitzvah of tzedakah, the mitzvah of charity. Performing a mitzvah can save your life. That's what happened to my daughter last night. In the merit of the mitzvah of tzedakah, her life was saved. In the merit of giving that charity to the beggar, her life was saved. And the mitzvah saves you. The mitzvah, the fulfillment of the mitzvah, has the ability to save you not only from horrible death, but from any death. Okay, that's the whole story in the Gemara, which the Meiri assumes we are familiar with. Now, let's understand what's going on here. You'll notice that in the story, Rabbi Akiva did not approach the astrologers. It's the astrologers who came to Rabbi Akiva and warned him, on the day your daughter gets married is the day a snake is going to bite her and she's going to die. From this, the Meiri concludes that there must be nothing wrong with hearing the advice of the astrologers. There must be nothing wrong with worrying and being concerned about the advice of the astrologers. After all, that's exactly what Rabbi Akiva did. He heard the advice of the astrologers, and he was worried about it. He was concerned about it, and therefore that must be okay. Now, there's a little distance between this and us approaching the astrologer. Meiri says quite clearly, it's okay. As long as it's okay to be concerned with astrological wisdom, as long as you do not ask the astrologers about it. Approaching the astrologer and soliciting the astrologer's opinion, that's wrong. But if you didn't go and ask the astrologer came and told you, or you figured it out yourself based on a study of astrological manuals, that's okay. Rabbi Akiva himself was very concerned with the astrological wisdom. That's correct and proper. What's wrong is soliciting, asking for their opinion. Let's go one step further. Rabbi Akiva was very concerned, was very bothered, accepted the prediction of the astrologers. Since the Gemara tells us flat out that Rabbi Akiva was doeg, very worried about the prediction of the astrologers? Well, one might say it's okay. It's correct to be concerned about astrology. That's what you might conclude. Rabbi Akiva was concerned, so we also are entitled to be concerned. But I don't understand people who draw that conclusion from Rabbi Akiva, the Meiri says. Bottom line, Rabbi Akiva lifted not a finger to prevent his daughter from getting married. According to this story, Rabbi Akiva lifted not a finger to prevent his daughter from getting married. It's true that the Gemara says he was worried. It's true that the Gemara says he was concerned. He was concerned. He was worried. It did bother him. But he didn't lift a finger to block the marriage. Worry, he did. Do something about the worry, he didn't. Ella, it follows, therefore, Shehem Matirim Af Al She'ela Shehere Emamru, some people incorrectly draw the conclusion from the Rabbi Akiva story that it's okay to ask astrologers for advice. Hare manda the Isyalid B'Shah Plonis Ganav Yehei Gazlan Yehei V'chein Harbe. The Gemara has plenty. The Gemara has plenty of astrological advice. The Gemara has plenty of examples. Someone born under such and such a celestial body will be a thief. Someone born under such and such a celestial body will be a robber. There are plenty of examples of that in the Gemara. But when the Gemara gives all of these examples of people being born under certain influences, tending to be thieves, tending to be robbers, all the Gemara meant was everyone has some tendency to larceny. Anyone who walks along the street, anyone who conducts his day-to-day affairs, sees plenty of opportunities for larceny and thievery. The difference between me and a thief is, although I see plenty of opportunities to steal things, the difference between me and the thief is the thief does it. At least up to this point, have been able to overcome the Yetzer Hara. I don't actually do the thievery, but everyone has some tendency for larceny, and the Torah expects us to overcome that. Af mezo ein raya etzli sheharei hoda'azo eina el lachriach tivo. Ein ze ela kemishu rotzeh leidat v'mucham b'tivo kedei shu yargil atzmo b'dvarim karim. Well, everyone who has a tendency to some problem, whether it's a tendency to a spiritual Torah problem, he has a tendency to be a thief, or some medical problem, he has a tendency to collect cholesterol plaques in his arteries, or he has a tendency to high blood pressure. Anyone who has a tendency for a bad result, whether it's a mitzvah bad result or a medical bad result, of course he wants to take measures to counteract that. But bottom line, sof divreihem shehochmas hakaldim eina hochma kochavim levad. Bottom line, there's a lot more to astrology than the examples that we have given in connection with Rabbi Akiva. There's much more to astrology beyond the question of when Mars is ascendant. Ela shenit arva behem meleches kishuf shehachmas hakochavim eina yecholel lahodia prate devarim. But much false sorcery has been mixed in to the astrological wisdom in the course of the years, and astrology as it exists today, he wrote this back in the Middle Ages, astrology as it existed in the Middle Ages has become a mixture of true science mixed in with a lot of magical garbage. שאם יודע בדרך הכוכבים זה האיש יצליח יקנה שדות וכרמים לא יודע שיקנה מפלוני. Even if the stars inform us, even if the location of the stars is correct, that buying a field is good activity, The stars have no way of saying which field to buy or from whom to buy it. Chaldeim hayu omrim, the astrologers say, Kulhu nachsif Yosef moke shabe achalahu. The astrologers said in the Gemara that Yosef, the great lover of Shabbos, Yosef, the great lover of Shabbos, would have a certain astrological event occur to him, and indeed it happened, as predicted by the astrologers. Well, we've run out of time in talking about the story of Yosef, the lover of Shabbos. We're going to talk about his story next week and see what the Meiri concludes from that. Until next week, I wish you a good Shabbos and a good week. Look forward to seeing you all next week when we will have some conclusions based on the opinion of the Meiri regarding which elements of astrology are acceptable and which are objectionable. Until then, shalom, shalom.